Glad to have you back. It's the Business Daily right here on Trust Television. Now we go into our discussion. The National Bureau of Statistics, talking about NBS, is planning to rebase Nigeria gross domestic product, talking about GDP, and of course the Consumer Price Index, which measures the inflation numbers. Of course, there are expectations that the economy will be bigger when that is done, while the inflation will be lower. We see how that is going to pan out. This was the situation in 2024. In 2014, I beg your pardon, when Nigeria became Africa's largest economy, with the GDP surging by 89% to $510 billion and inflation averaging 8.05% compared to 8.05% compared to 8.50% in the previous year. How are we going to be able to achieve that with the current economic realities? Inflation at almost 35%, 34.65% as it is currently. And of course, the GDP growth averaging 3.46%. How do we achieve this rebasing? And of course, taking us back to the African largest economy as it were in 2014. Currently, Nigeria is the fifth largest economy in Africa based on our GDP numbers, because we've lost over $300 billion of our GDP due to currency devaluation over the years. Currently, Nigeria GDP stands at $195 billion. If you calculate it by GDP per capita, it's less than $1,000. That is a very major concern for Nigeria. I have two gentlemen joining me virtually from Lagos. Muktar Mohammed is a financial analyst and CEO of Finance with Muktar. He joined me virtually from Lagos. Good morning, Muktar.
Thank you for having me, Yusuf. Good morning.
All right. I will also have joining me on the show as well Adegboyega Adebajo. Adegboyega is an investment banker and lead advisor, Amethyst and Ashlar Advisory. He will also joining me in the course of the discussion. But let me start with Muktar. Muktar, what does it really mean to rebase GDP or Consumer Price Index at this point in time?
Well, GDP rebasing is good for the economy because, again, it looks at how much your economy has been able to grow in terms of new entry into your economy. The economy is not supposed to be static; it's supposed to be innovative. So when you look at, like you said, 2014, when we did that, a lot of things have happened. Normally, GDP rebasing takes every 5 years because of a lot of economic evolution at that point. At the time we did the GDP rebasing, we only have Ministry of Communication, but now we now have Ministry of Communication and Digital Economy. We have seen that we now have blue economy. So a lot of things have happened. The telecommunications sector has expanded to data driven. Also, the financial sector have brought in a lot of fixed. Uh, um, we now have fintech driving that sector. All these were not captured some years ago. So definitely you have to do your rebasing every five years for such new economy because they've added a lot to the GDP. Remember at that time again, some other sector also from the economy may not have been adding so much during the 2014. You're talking about mining. Mining now is beginning to add so much to the Nigerian economy. So all these are part of what makes the rebasement very important, so that you know the true nature of your economy, and from there you could begin to attract more investors into those space. 2014 too, I think at that time we've not had this finally unbundling of both PHCM. So we have seen that now, and so all that also will add up to the economy in the power sector. So a lot of things have happened, and so definitely rebasing is time to do rebasing. But sometimes when you look at our rebasing as a nation, we tend to politicize it. We want to become the biggest economy in the world during the administration of President Bola Tinubu, and that and that. So that's where I have my concern. But about rebasing the economy, I think is a nice thing to do.
Indeed, yeah, it's a nice thing to do to rebase the economy to know where you stand. Let me bring in Adegboyega Adebajo now. Yeah, Muktar did raise about the necessity of rebasing the GDP, but NBS is emphasizing that the exercise does not necessarily mean that GDP will become more robust or shrink. Rather, they say to give an accurate assessment of the economy. Looking at the numbers, the data that they have been releasing over the years, is it that they are having doubts in their own data?
Well, I probably would want to take off from where Mukhtar ended, where he expressed certain concerns. And those concerns have a lot to do with the validity and veracity of the figures we are getting from the National Bureau of Statistics. Just about a bit over a year ago, the NBS actually redefined the basis of how they calculate unemployment in Nigeria.
Absolutely.
And the effect was to say that unemployment had drastically reduced, which did not relate to what was happening outside on the streets or in the markets. For a lot of people, the big question mark was, what exactly is the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics doing? Are figures being politicized or not? I believe as an institution, it should be pretty much independent. It should be able to let people have confidence in its figures. So now when we're talking of rebasing, and there are all kinds of suggestions as to what type of economic activities, and I wouldn't want to mention those economic activities here, Yusuf, but I'm sure we've all read them in the newspapers. Why some countries would want to include activities which typically, if you're doing international finance with the World Bank would want you to affirm and sign a covenant that the funds will not go into those type of activities. So for me, that's also one of the reasons why I think the intention to rebase the economy is coming a bit too early. We've been 18 months into the reform. We need to go a lot more. Yes, there's now supposed to be the blue economy, the digital economy, but what sort of impact has happened in that regard? What's happening to all the other realities? The industrial sector is performing very, very poorly. So these are considerations without us being certain as to what's happening and what figures are to be put into the statistics. I don't think it's time to rebase. And I think pretty much the NBS needs to come out and let us build the necessary confidence in its figures. Thank you.
Indeed, building the necessary confidence in NBS figures. Muktar, you're listening to Mr. Adegboyega there talking about building confidence in NBS figures. Some people have said that the figures from NBS most times don't really reflect what is happening on the street.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It doesn't really reflect. You talk about, like I said, job, and again, the parameters. We might not say it doesn't reflect. I think it's the parameter that they use. I mean, maybe those parameters are not conducive for the type of environment that we are, or the kind of economy we run. Because if you say somebody being employed 1 hour in a week, now is being classified as employed. And so how much did he receive in that 1 hour that he was employed in a week? It's compared to when he developed companies, some people tend to work just 1 hour so that they can have time for their kids, to take their kids to school. They don't want to, that 1 hour is just the only free time they have after their kid has gone to schools, so that they cannot reduce their burden in terms of paying for nannies and others to take care of their putting their children in daycare. Those are part of what they calculate to just do 1 hour in a day. So when you look at it relatively compared to what they will pay if they have their children in daycare, they seem to earn more. So, but in our own cases, we don't run our economy like that. Our economy is peculiar. If I give somebody that is doing a daily job earn about nothing. So when you say that is why you are now beginning to base your employment, then people are worried. So when you come with that figure, then it seems to be like almost every Nigerian is employed, because the informal sector employed over 85% of Nigeria. So by the time you begin to say, if I work for 1 hour, that means I've been employed. That means almost every Nigerian have been employed, and that's not true. And then you look at relative, they're not talking about the employment, they're not talking about relative income that comes in. So when you look at that employment, then you begin to look at their figures, then you begin to ask yourself, why is it the World Bank, IMF said we have increased in poverty rate, and then you at Nigerian Bureau of Statistics say we have improved in employment rate? So it doesn't correlate. So I totally agree with him. I think the data and have not been what we expect based on the parameters they are using. And like the former DG said, he was also Yemi Kale was also told about using these parameters when he was DG, he refused. He said because that would not be a true reflection of the Nigerian economy. But we are seeing it being used now, and so I think they need to look at that. That's why people don't have confidence in their data any longer.
Indeed. Still staying with you, Muktar, we talked about the GDP rebasing. I think we did it in 1990 and of course 2014. There, if you look at the gap is really quite wide there. But let's look at the benefits of the GDP rebasing that we had in 2014. What will you really point to that was the benefit of that rebasing in 2014?
Well, the benefits, I mean, were supposed to be much, but there were not so much benefit because from 2015, we had President Buhari went into recession and we never recovered again because for remember before we did that rebasing, our GDP growth was about 7% per annum, sometimes 7.5, 6.8 and that. But in 2015, when we did the rebasing, and also, you could also look at it, 2014, when we do the rebasing, you could also look at it as a political side of it, because at that time, we were preparing for an election that President Buhari was to come. So it was a means of saying that we have been able to grow the economy to become one of Africa's largest economy. So when you look at that, what we're building, if you look at when we did it in 2014 and where we are now in 2025, you can't but say it didn't make any difference because after 2015, our exchange rate went down. We will start having before the rebate. I think the exchange rate, the naira to the dollar exchange was about 180. That 2015, it moved to 360, and then our foreign reserve also shrink to about 28 billion dollars at that time. So we continue to see the economy nosedive. Foreign investors were not coming again, comparable to when you do your GDP, we are supposed to attract more foreign investors into your economy. So I don't think it has been more beneficial because maybe the people that are at the helm of affairs there, they were not the one in charge of the GDP. They didn't even look at the data to see how they can drive it. It was more or less like they felt it was more or less like a political tool, because I remember the then president, current president Tinubu, criticized that, saying we are the largest economy in Africa at that time. Because he said, why can you be the largest economy? Your youth are suffering. So definitely, when you look at that with what it is today, there was no really big benefit that I can see that has happened to the Nigerian economy.
Absolutely. Let me bring in Mr. Adegboyega. Mr. Adegboyega, I'm also concerned that why should we focus on, GDP economy that continues to create more poor people? What's the point being the largest economy when you have about 70% of your population and in multi-dimensional poverty?
Well, again, this goes to my reason why I think we're talking about rebasing too early. Right now, the economy is undergoing some form of reform. We know when the reform started, and we have no idea. We can't put our finger on a particular date in future where we will say the reform has ended or the intended outcomes have been achieved. And it's for this reason that I think we're a work in progress right now. Clearly, there is no government that would want to increase the number of poor people in their country. That may happen as a side effect of some economic policies. It therefore behoves the government that as they start to achieve what they want to achieve with their policies, they go back and start thinking in terms of alleviating poverty. And when I talk about alleviating poverty, I'm not referring to social investment programs where rice is distributed, oil is distributed, generators or wheelbarrows are given out to people. No, it is about creating the kind of environment where people can take their skills, where people can set up businesses, where entrepreneurs can access finance, and where the market is genuinely inclined towards producing. We're a trading economy right now, and we will continue to trade and to consume, buy and sell, buy and sell. It's important. It's 2025. We totally understand why economies that are stronger in the world are those economies where their people actually manufacture and produce. And the big question is, what are we doing about that? When do we need to start producing? So it's a work in progress. I think we're still in a reform stage. We cannot say the reforms are over. And it can't be the intention of the government to have this situation as the ideal situation. So there's still a lot to be done, Yusuf.
A lot to be done there, according to Mr. Adegboyega there. Of course, this is not the time for us to begin to think of, rebasing the economy. It's the time probably to begin to get our tractors to the farm. Get food to the market so that people can have what to eat. Of course, get drugs to the hospital, create jobs, create industries, so that we can be able to have that.
Yep.
But Mr. Muktar, it doesn't seem that the government believe what we are actually saying. They are so focused on rebasing the economy, perhaps like you mentioned, to score cheap political points.
Maybe government is all about their projects. They are what they are set to achieve this year. I think, and that's what is happening. Maybe one of the things they have chosen to achieve this year is to rebase the economy. And in reality, it's a high time they rebase the economy. That's the truth. They're supposed to rebase your economy every five years. I remember when we did that one in 1990, there were promises that we'll begin to do it every 5 years. Ordinarily, there's no issue about rebasing, but like Adebajo said, it depends on what are the parameters we are using to do the rebasing. So for me, that's the challenge. But to say it's not time for it, I think it's time we should rebase the GDP, whether the timing is right or not. We've waited too long. If we have done it before, we would have been doing the second rebase after maybe they would have been able to patient to watch, see what this reform has been able to achieve. We mustn't forget that the first time we have created ourselves to become the largest economy was when the other PDP was running. So since they are NEPC, they've not been given that title that they've been able to grow the economy to become the largest economy in Africa. That, like I said, politics sometimes takes center stage in the economy of Nigeria, which is very, very bad.
Indeed, focusing on politics to drive economy is indeed not the way to go. We have all agreed to that there. Mr. Adebajo, do you think rebasing this GDP will take Nigeria again to the summit of as the largest economy in Africa, given the current reality? If you look at the data, they are not looking so good. Inflation at 34%. Of course, the MPR 27.5%. If you look at where inflation were in 2014, where we rebased, it was just a little above 8%, 8.50%. When we did the rebasing, it came down to 8.05%. So are we likely going to achieve that when we do this rebasing that the NBS is proposing?
Well, Yusuf, remember that there were indications that the government had said inflation will come down to about 15% in 2025. Rebasing is about adjusting the base year you use for calculating growth and economic indicators in the economy. All the conversation about rebasing, I'm not quite sure if 2024 is going to be the year or 2025 is going to be the year for the rebasing. Clearly, we don't have indices for 2025 yet. We're barely 13, 14 days into 2025. Economic figures for December 2024 aren't out yet. So we're not certain when this base year is going to be. But without a doubt, and I think the earliest or the farthest back that the government will go will be sometime in 2024. It will simply mean that perhaps inflation has not been as high as we're looking at it now, because we're looking all the way back and we're taking the trend over since 2014, as Muktar said. Thank you, Muktar, because I didn't quite put my finger on that year. So since 2014 to now, we're looking at inflation and looking at that stream. But once it's adjusted to 2024, as a base year, you aren't going to get the kind of high figures you get. Your exchange rates, you won't be comparing 450 naira to $1 anymore. We're going to be looking at the exchange rate at that time and looking at where we are. So everything will just sort of seem to be, well, moderate, as it were. But the big question I would ask is, does that solve the problems on the streets? The government still owes itself, and it's not, one is not being political in any way. but it owes itself the need to see to it that the people feel the impact. You mentioned agriculture, and it's amazing that in most of the conversations these days, agriculture is hardly ever mentioned. But people need to be able to eat first, and food must be not just available, but also affordable. And that's a very, very important part of things. Money supply has been increasing, and therefore inflation has been increasing. And I wonder, I mean, given your question, is this going to be a year where we have a fair degree of stability? That means inflation is not galloping, food prices aren't jumping from January to March, from March to June. Is this going to be a year where fuel prices drop? So the impact on headline inflation can be much lower. People need stability. It's not so much that the prices should come down. It is just that the prices should be stable. Let's know what the exchange rate is so we can plan with it. Let's know what prices will be like so we can plan with that. And then employers and investors and entrepreneurs can all make their plans and try to do business based on the parameters. And then maybe we'll start to see growth, real growth. Okay, not inflation-driven growth, but real growth in the economy. Thank you.
Indeed, a good one there. Before I bring in Muktar, let's switch gear now to look at the Nigeria 2025 macroeconomic forecast there. You have also talked about 2025 there, Mr. Adegboyega, regards to how the indices is going to look, whether the inflation is going to continue galloping, as the case may be. Let's see the graphics there with regards to the forecast there as well. The GDP growth, 3% there. Of course, the population 200 million plus, talking about 2025. Trade balance is around 5.5 billion US dollars. Foreign reserves for $40 billion. If you look at the total debt, 120 billion US dollars there. Of course, unemployment rate in 2025 is projected to be 40.5%. Of course, that's according to CBN and of course NBS. The inflation rate to average 24.50%. That is a distance from the federal government projection of 15%. Of course, the monetary policy rate as well is 25.50%. So we're looking at the CBN reducing the MPR in the course of the year as well. Of course, talking about what we account for our contributions in sub-Saharan Africa of 10% of the population. Of course, in terms of our GDP, is still way below there. Of course, in a region where our GDP, I beg your pardon, is 10%, but our contribution in terms of population is about 20% in sub-Saharan Africa. Mr. Muktar, if you look at that numbers there, talking about the projection for 2024, the MPR to drop to 24.50%, inflation number a little above 24% as well. Do you think this is achievable?
You are saying inflation at 24%. That means you are not at par with the government, because the government is looking at inflation at 15%. But I totally agree that definitely we'll see a slowdown in inflationary pressure this year. Largely, that will be largely due to if we are able to address the exchange rate volatility. If we are able to bring stability, government has said is 1,400. I personally still think it's very high. But again, though, maybe the other wins whereby the government is trying to bring down inflation to 15% is through this rebasing of the economy, which will bring down inflation. So maybe that's why they are full confident that inflation will come back by 15%. But in reality, like we always say, it doesn't really happen like that. So for me, I think realistically, we should see an inflation going down to about 26 to 28% in 2025, maybe getting to 2026, 2027, we could see that drastically come down. Because again, when you look at inflation, like I said, is largely driven by exchange rate volatility, and that we've not been able to maintain that. And when you look at the government that came in, at the time they came in, the inflation was about 23.4% when they came in, and they have taken it to a height of about 34%, and they want to crash it within 1 year after 18 months of taking it that high. You begin to wonder what kind of economic miracle are they going to do? Is they going to be naira exchanging for dollar for one naira? I mean, $1 to one naira. I mean, so for me, I think it's very ambitious, but like Mr. Adebajo just pointed out, maybe They are trying to use the economy rebasing to bring it down. But again, that could just be food textbook economy indices. But the reality on ground will still be there, even if you are playing politics with the economy.
Mr. Adegboyega, do you share the same opinion with Mr. Muktar?
To a large extent, and I want to remind Mr. Muktar about something. He just said maybe by 2026, 2027, but let's all remember that this year, 2025, is the only year remaining that we can have a full year of economic policies being impactful. By the time we go past the first quarter of 2026, I believe from experience, we're going to have much more politics and less governance in the economy. Everything is going to start being tweaked towards the elections in 2027. And remember, the elections are February 2027 or March 2027. So from March 2026, it's going to be all politics. The kind of policies and wanting to see those policies through to impact on the economy will probably not be as profound as we can have it this year. It's one thing to like Mr. Muktar said about textbook arrangement of figures, but it's another thing to know about what exactly is happening on the streets. Are we still going to have rising prices in 2025? Are we still going to have slow or negative economic growth? Remember that a lot of manufacturing companies have inventory that they have not been able to sell because their prices have increased given inflation and the demand has dropped. So their inventory is high. A lot of industries are adjusting their costs and therefore unemployment is high. These three factors bring about a situation where you almost have stagnation, you have inflation, and it becomes a problem, which is why we've seen the CBN increasing NPR over time, but it doesn't seem to be taming inflation, as it were. Again, the money supply is high and it's increasing. It's increased by 50% year on year. We're over 103 trillion naira in circulation in the economy right now. These things are driving inflation, and you don't want to take away the disposable income of people right now because it's even tough as it is, and the sense is as if, oh, this money is available, but it isn't exactly circulating around the economy. So if we've got real slow economic growth, if inflation persists, even if it's around 24, 25, 26, it's still high. I'm not saying we can achieve single digits in 12 months, but if we can get to that 15 that the government is talking about, it would have been ideal, but I don't see us getting there. So it's still going to be high inflation, slow economic growth, and high unemployment rates. So the government needs to pull out all its experts. We need to be able to sit down, and I'll take a cue from something that was done a long time ago when we were going to do the structural adjustment program. Some people said, oh, why did we have to do that? But I think given the kind of resources and intellectual capacity we have in Nigeria, it's time to start not town hall meetings, but trying to have serious seminars in different parts of the country, touching and trying to take in ideas from different perspectives, different sectors and sections of the country, involving the chambers of commerces, involving the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, and not neglecting the political associations too, just so that you don't have the kind of situation we have at present with the tax reform bills, where an entire region of the economy of the country is standing against it. So I think, yes, it's time for us to talk as a country, consider what needs to be done. Let's know where we're biting the bullet and let the government, make the effort, make the policies. We only have this year. But as soon as we cross into 2026, it's going to be all politics until May 2027 or August or September 2027 before we can start talking economics again. Thank you very much, Yusuf.
Indeed. Talking about Mr. Muktar, talking about government making efforts to bring down inflation, especially food inflation. There was a piece of news yesterday that we've taken delivery of 30,000 tons of rice from Thailand, and that is meant to crash the prices of rice in the country. Don't you think government is making efforts in that regard?
What they are saying about that, but it's good if they've done that. Remember, I always call it government magic. This was the same government that told us that there will be a truckload, that each state will have some truck of rice that will be distributed to the citizens. But till today, we didn't see that. But that would be good news. But how much of that you are looking at? You are using a short-time solution to a long-time problem, and problem. Like I said, the game changer would have been what they were trying to do to remove tariff on household items, especially food item. That would have been a game changer. But again, we didn't see that. Even after signing a bill to make it run for 6 months, we didn't see that happen. So I'm not so excited about that. Again, you are trying to remember that before they came to power, the former administration have told us that we will be one of the largest producer of rice, and we didn't see that, and now we are going back to Thailand to bring in this rice and to compete with our local rice also. That will also be a very big challenge for our locals. I think what they needed to do was what they were planning to do to make it maybe to make our local rice attractive by removing value-added tax and other things on our local rice consumption, so it make it cheaper for us. But they are looking to solve the food crisis in the short term. If that's what they are trying to achieve, fantastic. In then growing the Nigerian sector of that in the long term, that will be good. But if you are just bringing in if just want to crash price, after you crash the price, what happens next? Because you are just bringing about 40,000 tons after within the next 1 year, with the kind of population we have, is finished. So will you have to continue to bring it, or you will make it in such a way that we are self-sufficient, we're able to produce for ourselves more than still depending on Thailand to give us those rices. So for me, it's all about coming up with this is a short-term measure, and this is a long-term measure, and this is what we plan to achieve, and this is how we are going to achieve it. That for me will be the time that we'll be confident that we are really doing something as regards food security.
Mr. Adebajo, with regards to, as we wrap up now, let's look at money supply in circulation. As in 2014, the money supply hit an all-time high of 108 trillion naira. But if you look at the beginning of the year, in 2025, the CBN, in the new CBN reports, they have said that loans to bank has increased to as high as 1.2 trillion naira in the first 7 days of 2025 because of the liquidity squeeze in the system. What do you make of this? This is huge. Just within 7 days, we are recording these numbers.
Well, yes, you need to bear in mind that banks have commitments in terms of already agreed loan terms. Some importers would have positioned themselves to access finance at the beginning of the year and to bring in commodities or goods to be sold in the course of the year. So a lot of it could be in terms of opening LCs to import for the first quarter of the year. It's not unusual at all. But then again, we have a situation where despite what is the MPR and the difficulty for small businesses to borrow, the larger businesses are still borrowing. There's a particular statistic that might have actually, gone under the radar with you. And it is that recently the Securities and Exchange Commission wrote a certain circular to the FMDQ that all CPs to be issued in Nigeria had to be registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Now, it wasn't the case prior to 2024. And in 2024, the amount raised through commercial papers, which are short-term borrowings, went...
Sorry, I have to stop you there. Let me give Muktar 30 seconds before we wrap the conversation.
Okay.
Mr. Muktar, the CBN is forecasting about 24% or thereabout for MPR this year. Do you agree with that projection, or you have something otherwise?
Well, when it comes to CBN, I think you would have allowed Mr. Adegboyega to round up, because I was really enjoying all his data as regards all this government magic that we are doing with the economy. So for me, I don't have much to say about the NPR coming to 24%, and how would that also help smaller businesses grow, because that is still high for smaller businesses to borrow. And again, like he said, smaller business thrive in Nigerian business are liquid driven. So if there's no liquidity, you are killing one of the most vibrant sector of the Nigerian business. So let's see how they will achieve that. For me, I'm skeptical about it, especially based on what we have on ground. The only way they can be able to achieve that is if the physical side is able to do something to match up with the monetary side. As it stands now, it seems that the monetary side seems to be doing all the work, and the physical side seems to be struggling in a lot of areas.
All right. I must thank you, gentlemen. Adegboyega Adebajo, he is the lead advisor, and of course, he's also an investment banker as well, but he's the lead advisor, Amethyst Ashlar Advisory as well. I must thank you for your time, Mr. Adebajo.
You're welcome.
All right. Muktar Mohammed, financial analyst, CEO, Finance with Muktar. I must thank you for your time as well.
Thank you for having me.
All right. That is a wrap on the show today. We'll be back again tomorrow. I am